Years ago, probably based off a recommendation from former Food TV host Chef Alton Brown, I subscribe to a daily email called Wordsmith. This email comes 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, from Anu Garg. The premise is that there are so many underutilized words in the English language that our primary language is chock full of incredible words, that to know these words would help to enrich our speech and our writing. For what it's worth, today's word was plimsolline, from the theme of the week, which is eponyms. An eponym, in case you're not familiar, is a person after whom is a word named after a person whom a discovery or invention place. In this case, the plimsoll is any various horizontal lines on the side of a ship indicating the depth to which it may be immersed under various conditions, or a threshold or limit. Basically, the word came about because of the work of Samuel Plimsoll, 1824 to 1898, whose efforts were to make shipping safer. He did this because in the mid-1800s, there were many unscrupulous ship owners who overloaded their ships, essentially making them death traps to recoup insurance money. His efforts to protect ships and sailors probably saved countless lives through the creation of the Plimsoll line. All that being said, there's another eponym I've been thinking about a lot lately, and that is Luddite. For the longest time, I thought a Luddite was a self-appointed term to describe anyone who either rejects the use of technology or is at least resistant to new technologies. However, after a conversation with one of our congregants, I learned that the history of the Luddite movement is much more complicated and nuanced than this description. To borrow from the web, the Luddites were members of the 19th century movement of English textile workers who opposed the use of certain types of automated machinery due to concerns relating to worker pay and output quality. They often destroyed the machines in organized raids. Members of the group referred to themselves as Luddites, self-described followers of, quote, Ned Ludd, a legendary weaver whose name was used as a pseudonym in threatening letters to mill owners and government officials. The Luddite movement began in Nottingham, England, and spread to North and Yorkshire between 1811 and 1816. Mill and factory owners took to shooting protesters, and eventually the movement was suppressed by legal and military force, which included execution and penal transportation of accused and convicted Luddites. So what really began as a protest movement, and a valid one at that, was over time diminished to a more derogatory comment about people who struggle with or reject technology. But more on this in a moment. One of the least understood people in our Torah, and probably one of the most looked down upon, is Isaac. Sandwiched between his father Abraham, the progenitor of ethical monotheism, and his son Jacob, the foundational creator of the line of Israel, Isaac is often viewed as a very passive player in his own life. Even in this week's parasha Toldot, Jacob is tricked by both his wife Rebekah and his son Jacob into giving Jacob the blessing over his favored son of Esau. As my colleague and friend Rabbi David Young wrote, looking back at Isaac's life, he is never given a voice before or after the Akedah. They speak about him a lot, but Isaac does not speak for himself. When God tells Abraham that he and Sarah will have a son, Abraham wonders how a man of 100 and a woman of 90 could possibly have children together, and he laughs. Sarah has the same reaction later when the angels tell her that she will have a child. They both laugh, Yitzchak for Abraham and Batzikak for Sarah. For their laughter, they are told they will name their son Isaac Yitzchak, which shares its root with the laughter they display. And with our tradition taking away Isaac's voice, this means we can ascribe a lot of values to him without perhaps understanding who he was or how he viewed the world. I've been thinking about this a lot as of late, because our world is not only ever changing, but the rate of change is faster than ever before in human history. And yet we are told time and time again, we must embrace the change or be left behind. Perhaps the most recent round of change has to do with a very popular topic of conversation as of late, AI, or artificial intelligence. Now, as someone who grew up on science fiction like Star Trek, and aside, Star Wars, which I love, isn't science fiction. It's fantasy, but in space. But that's a conversation for another day. 2001, the movie AI, The Matrix, and of course the Terminator, to name a few, I've developed a healthy dose of skepticism of AI. In reality, according to AI is a technology that allows computer systems to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as learning, problem solving, and decision making. This is different from actual consciousness, which is often the inspiration for many fictional versions of the apocalypse, as depicted in films like The Terminator or The Matrix. That being said, I, for one, am still skeptical, not so much because of its intent, but because it is being proposed as a global solution to any number of issues, and because of the speed by which it seems to have suddenly been implemented anywhere and everywhere. Does this make me a Luddite? I like to think so. But in the classical understanding of the word, of how AI can be used and misused to replace a human experience and to supplant human creations and human creativity. But I am a rabbi, not a technologist. So I like examining concepts through the lens of Jewish experiences. So in particular, one of the challenges I've experienced and witnessed with AI and programs like ChatGPT is that it can and will make up sources. For those of you who may not know, my office is filled with books. That is one of the perks of being a rabbi. People expect a rabbi's office to be filled both with Judaica and lots of books. Yes, I also have a fair share of Astros paraphernalia, but that's beside the point. So even if I look up sources on the web, I will always verify it with my books. And there have been on more than one occasion where a source was completely made up. It fit the narrative of the question, but had no basis in reality. Or as the late author Michael Crichton liked to warn us in many of his books, including Jurassic Park, just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should. And more than that, there will always be the law of unintended consequences, or which he wrote about through the lens of chaos theory. Whether or not AI will ultimately be good or bad or something in between for the history of humanity remains to be seen. But what we do know is that it should be treated with caution, and we should always be asking questions, which in and of itself is a very Jewish approach. Throughout the history of our people, we have been very slow to change, and whenever change was thrust upon us, we often turn to the teachings of our ancestors to help us navigate those changes. AI certainly can be a tool to help make Jewish learning and worship more accessible, but at the same time, we must avoid the temptation to allow technology to further dehumanize the human experience. As Rabbi Joshua Fixler, a colleague and expert on AI, writes, "We are more than merely machines. We are beautiful and irreplaceable. We are reflections of the divine mystery. We need to break free of thinking of ourselves in computational metaphors if we are to rediscover that human beings are far more glorious and mysterious than any large language model or neural network could ever dream of being. What we need is a great rehumanizing project." Judaism is a rehumanizing project. The mitzvot, the commandments, rehumanize us. They teach us that we are not just here to survive and consume, but that we are invited to live lives of meaning, purpose, and connection. And AI can do a great many tasks, but all of the qualities mentioned are above uniquely human. We need to reawaken these human traits if we are to overcome the forces that deny us our uniqueness and diminish our worth. We must re-engage in this great rehumanizing project so that the 21st century will not be the age of thinking machines, but the age of moral humans. With that in mind, let us go back to the question of Isaac. Perhaps we misunderstand Isaac. He wasn't simply a victim of circumstance, but he was struggling to find his place in a newly changing world. His father introduced a radical idea of ethical monotheism, and Isaac was expected to not only embrace it, but to embody it and to teach it. At the same time, he was expected to create a family that could take these newfound traditions and run with them, which he ultimately did. I would argue that perhaps Isaac was the first Luddite. He may not have been outspoken, but he was certainly cautious, curious, and also reserved judgment before acting. So perhaps in this ever rapidly changing world, we shouldn't just look to the Abrahams and Jacobs and Moseses and Miriams of the world, but also to the Isaacs as well. The Isaacs who encourage us to question, to challenge, to probe, and not just to accept. And this approach could even help us draw our own plimsoll lines of how far we are willing to go in the pursuit of technology. And we're only willing to go so far as long as we do not have to give up our humanity along the journey. Shabbat Shalom.